It's a delight to be here. Thank you to Dawson's. My brother's a physicist, so I texted him. I'm saying I'm presenting at the Royal Institution. For him, this is hallowed ground. We always used to watch the Christmas lectures, so it's nice to be here. In terms of this presentation, it's on my website. I did something similar. If you're at the University College London thing on digital textbooks, you can just drop off now because there's a lot of overlap, but nevertheless. Just relax. There's a lot of text here and a lot of citations, and I do that just because you can go back to the presentation and read it later. So just kind of take this as some food for thought that I think will pick up on some of the themes that we heard right at the beginning of the day and some of the themes that have been made throughout the other sessions. So I want to put some context first. I do these, what I call briefing papers. They're not really academic papers, and they're relevant here. I did one on the role of the library in teaching and learning, and they're open source, they're free, they're CC0 licensed. You can do whatever you like with them. You can copy and paste, and they're completely free and available on HE-LibTech. And really this presentation is based on the second one, the student consumer and the rise of e-textbook platforms. So I'm going to be following some of the themes in that paper. You can't see that too well. This is the Sconnell, a report that was done from Sconnell last year. I'll skip ahead to pick up what do they see. They probably did a clicker exercise too to see what were the key issues confronting academic institutions and open access, measuring insight, and so I'll be talking about some of these changing is teaching and learning, and you'll see that the one at the end, students as customers and consumers, I'm going to use interchangeably, is also one of the transformational things that's going on. And we've heard about the Office for Students and all these kind of things. I want to pick up on that theme throughout this presentation a bit, really. So let's just look at a few of those themes. So open, price of textbooks. What about if they actually cost you nothing? Well, open educational resources have made a huge impact, or a significant impact in the US, and have been cited as one of the reasons why Pearson hit some financial trouble in the US, because institutions were not paying for textbooks. They were using open educational resources instead. So that can have an impact. And measuring library impact, the librarians here know that your libraries make an impact on student learning, and there's now an increasing range of evidence that supports that kind of perhaps instinctive hunch. So this is a quote from an Australian study a few years ago, and there's US studies, that it's really nice to know here is some real evidence that libraries make an impact on student outcomes and learning. So that's important. And this whole thing of, in the UK we've heard about it, the Teaching Excellence Framework, but really that's just a UK initiative that's really, there's a lot of global interest in teaching and learning, that a renewed, what do libraries do? They support teaching and learning research. You've always been doing this, but there's now a real focus on that, Office of Students, a real focus on teaching and learning. And in the past, for a lot of universities, it's been all about research in a sense. But now, even research universities are really having to impress people about their teaching and learning. And finances, we've talked about that. So this was, I think, one of the last things that HEFGE blessed us with, which was, it's really saying that, when you said the answer to that question, you're going to get more students, a lot of universities are very dependent on students. There was what The Guardian called a few years ago a spending spree. And universities spent loads of money on accommodation for students and new facilities and so on. But what HEFGE is saying is that kind of, if it ever was a golden age, it is coming to an end. But then there's that student, what we saw Sconnell call the student customer, but also the student consumer. This is a report by a centre-right think tank, I think is how they describe themselves. But the language here is pretty harsh, isn't it? Students, if you're at a university, you're cheating students, apparently, right? So if that sits comfortably. then you're cheated of the benefits that they were reputably assured they could expect in return. So that whole value for money thing. Students are there, you're cheating them, you're not giving them value for money. And Vice-Chancellor of Buckingham University, who wrote the preface, says, the producer interest reigns. That's because the producer interest, and universities are producers, and we need to have more consumer-oriented universities and organisations. So there's a real political agenda that's pushing this. And whatever your thoughts on that, I mean, not everybody agrees with this. And I have to say that, you know, these are not my opinions, by the way. These are just the citations here. So that's kind of some of the background. So thinking about textbooks, and first of all, it's a nice Manchester study. If you know Dominic Broadhurst from Manchester, they did a really nice study. And unsurprisingly, when they asked their students, 70% agreed that a textbook is essential to their studies. So that's another piece of supportive evidence. So textbooks are important. From a US perspective, this quote is from Rick Anderson at the University of Utah, where the American experience is that students, the option is students, you buy your textbooks. That's it. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it a bit, but US students pay a lot of money because they have to buy their textbooks. And what he's saying, he called that the textbook taboo. Libraries not providing textbooks. And what he's saying is, if the library needs to be supporting its institutional mission, it needs to get over this. So even in a market which has been dominated by students buying textbooks, there's going to be a role for libraries. So something's going to go on, because the US, of course, is a huge market. And this, again, is Dominic's study from Manchester. And this is all about value. So the value, then, of the library delivering e-textbooks. Higher engagement of learning from students, increased satisfaction with the university and library. So, what do you think is going to happen to NSS scores? You hope they're going to go up. So here's a tactic. Does your university want better NSS scores? Dominic's view would be, well, a library-led e-textbook exercise. But are they good value? We've just done an exercise about what librarians and publishers thought. This was a similar study that Bernie Folan did and talked at UKSG a couple of years ago. And this was what librarians felt they really wanted to tell publishers. So does this resonate? It's like, we really, really haven't got any more money, you know? So I think that resonates. So where is that money going to come from if you want to start doing more extensive provision of textbooks? Now, there is money available within an institution. I don't know, I was going to say a typical teaching university, I'm not sure if there is one, but they have their income, their revenue is about £200 million a year, right? They're not small businesses, they're very big. So what they did at Leeds, they spent 26 million. So the point I'm trying to make here is that where an institution sees there is a value proposition, Leeds feel they can spend £26 million. Bedford spent £46 million. Birmingham spent £64 million. So when you say you haven't got much money, being provocative here, you're not telling the truth. You've got this amount, but it's not going to where you want it, perhaps. Nottingham Trent, we've heard from Helen, additional capital investment 5.3. Significant sums of money, because clearly the institution sees that these activities have a very good value proposition. The textbook process at Middlesex, there was an initial investment of up to £2 million to provide textbooks, an institutional investment, by the way. And I thought what was interesting here, that this was an institutional decision, but who were the best people to run this? The library. So although it wasn't originally it's not library money, the people now running this initiative are the libraries. So libraries are getting involved even when it's not coming out of library budgets. So significant investment going into a really strong value proposition around texts. And this is a TEF submission. So again, Anyone here with a, I won't ask you to put up your hands if you've got a bronze in the TEF, because that might be embarrassing. But if you did, go to your Vice-Chancellor and say, we're the library, we can get you upgraded from bronze to at least silver, and maybe gold, because Nottingham Trent got gold, because they were making these value propositions around library resources in their TEF submissions. And the TEF submissions are all online, and it's very interesting to see which ones included library resources and library activities in that TEF submission. But there is an issue, because when I rather mischievously said 26 million here, 46, that's capital expenditure, isn't it? So that tends to come out of a different pot. So it's not revenue, it's not the annual money going into the library. So there is an issue there. So I'm going to talk a bit more about textbooks in the sense of what I touched on right at the beginning about these new open approaches, because wouldn't it be nice if you said you wanted unlimited licenses, didn't you? So my briefing papers are an unlimited license. So what about if you had some textbooks on an unlimited license? So there's a UK initiative called Open Textbooks, which has looked at what happened in the US. So as I said, what was happening in the US was perceived to be an influence on the lower profitability of Pearson. So there are some open textbook initiatives that we might well see being replicated here. So that could make a real big difference. And what this person was here saying is the teaching excellence framework, of course, provides yet another impetus, incentive, to look at producing institutional textbooks. So this is someone, UCL Press, they've got a university press, and they're also involved in a textbook project. This institution is e-textbooks, so you can produce your own textbooks. So if the textbook isn't available, why doesn't the institution produce its own? Or there's a GIST project, which I think has now concluded, and it has delivered 8 textbooks. So I suppose that's progress. I don't know how many, what percentage of overall textbooks that would make. So there are some open initiatives. There's a way of saying we can overcome some of your concerns about licensing and costs and platforms even by making these all open and free. There's also the MOOC. You've heard of MOOCs, perhaps massive online whatever courses. Right? Anyone done a MOOC? If you do a MOOC, it's nice to have a book to go with it. So this is open online content. So this is moving away from perhaps what we conventionally think of as a textbook. And here's what it looks like. It's not going to come up very clearly on the screen. But really, it's all this disaggregated content. What I would think is, I guess a lot of the academic institutions here have reading list software, and a lot of the academic institutions that have reading list software have links with copyright clearance to digitize chapters. So there's this whole notion of, do you need the whole textbook anyway? Maybe you just need some bits of it. So this is a sense of being open and disaggregated. And if you like to, imagine, I know you can't see all the text, but imagine that was a textbook and each of those bits and pieces were freely available, just as small disaggregated bits to put into your teaching and learning. Now, the other impact I see this having is that we've conventionally had this idea that there were learning resources, and learning resources went into the virtual learning environment or the learning management system, depending on what you call it. And there were library resources, and library resources went into the library catalogue and were managed. And as long as 2001, John McColl was saying, I think we've got to rethink this. Shouldn't we be taking a more integrated approach to these things, these resources? Why do we distinguish between what's a learning resource? And I think, here's a quote from Core Text. So what this means through looking at the book, looking more holistically at learning and library resources, what we want to achieve, what's the end thing that we want to achieve? This quote from Core, enriched and personalised learning experience. So stop thinking, I guess, is what we're saying about the format, the textbook or the book, and start to think, how are we going to deliver enriched and personalised learning experiences, and take it from there. And the materials are a means to an end. So there's a big quote here, don't worry about that. And again, when I was at did any of you go to the Thales Aspire conference the other month, which is about reading lists? What came across to me there was a number of people not just talking about giving access to resources, but how can we get students more engaged with the resources, with the texts, and looking at them. So there's another way. How do you produce content that's going to be a lot more engaging and help students work collaborative? So we're obsessing perhaps about the wrong things, is the kind of direction I'm going about. And I guess if you're at institutions, you'll be doing lecture capture. Most universities, I think, are doing lecture capture now. That's a learning resource. Anyone got lecture captures in their catalogue or their reading list yet? I mean, the question is, why not? One of the reasons is the metadata is awful. So there's a role for libraries here to perhaps curate that kind of material. So lecture capture, students like lecture capture. Means they don't have to go to the lecture. Right? Now, UCL did suggest that there was actually a negative impact of that when you actually went to the lecture, there was you did get a better result. But nevertheless, that's early days. So, you know, is the lecture capture, is that the new textbook? So why are we worrying about textbooks when perhaps you just need to be doing lecture capture? Have you come across a company called Itzy? They're a South African company, been working with schools in South Africa, and what they allow the lecturer to do is to embed their own content into existing textbooks, tests and courses and comments and so on. So there's lots of ways. What I'm getting to is there's lots of ways we perhaps need to rethink these resources to deliver the result that we want. And the user experience. The customer as consumer means that they want a good user experience. And consumerisation this is a page off Wikipedia. This has been a trend that's been going on for a number of years. Now, I come from the town of Brentwood in Essex, which is famous for the only way is Essex. Bump into them all the time. But do you know what the other reason Brentwood is famous for? I mean, it's rhetorical, you probably won't know. In my high street, in front of Lloyd's Bank, there's a little plaque. And it was the very first bank in the whole wide world, in that place, that had an online automatic cash machine. In the world, in Brentwood. I'm surprised. We need to not get TOWIE tourists. We need to get ATM tourists to come and see this. It was the one that actually, it wasn't the first cash machine, but it was the one that actually checked your account to see if you had, so it could give you variable amounts of money. A huge increase in customer experience, right? Because banks were notoriously awful and still are perhaps about. So this whole notion of consumerisation is going across everywhere. And I like this quote. You know, has anyone actually said, I'm not going to use this thing because the user experience is too good? You can't have a user experience too good. And I have to say, I don't think we are yet good enough in our user experiences. So this focus on the UX, think about, now what was I talking to? I'm doing a project with the NHS at the moment, and they're looking at discovery systems. And one of the things we got an email from a practitioner, and one of the things he said was, it wasn't a student, but the material wasn't integrated into his personal environment. Dropbox and something to read it. So it was like he had to cobble together all kinds of processes to make these resources fit into his personal environment. So it's not just a question of delivering the textbook or the resource. It's got to fit into, you know, Dropbox and so on. And there's a whole plethora, of course, of personalised stuff out there. So you've got to be embedded in the digital materials, integrate into tools they use already. Okay, how are we doing? Right. Platforms next. We heard a lot about platforms. They're all over the place, aren't they? This is Wired magazine, a famous, you'll probably hear this lots of times in, platforms are eating the world. Who's using Uber? again, rhetorical question, Airbnb, these Deliveroo, these kind of solutions are really becoming very, very prevalent. Everybody wants to be a platform now. So what does that really mean? Well, you know, it's an old problem, isn't it? These are the laws of Ranganathan from 1930-something. You know, so what a platform does is just provide every book its reader, every reader its book. That's, you know, these fundamental things don't change. We graft on new technology. So the platform really does that, and there's I've pinched all this from, that's a great book to read actually, The Platform Revolution. So it consummates matches and facilitates the exchange of goods. So when you said you wanted a platform rather than a publisher, you know, these are some of the reasons, because it's a platform helps you to consummate those matches. And the other thing is, platforms, Uber, controversial, doesn't have any taxes, right? Airbnb doesn't own any accommodation. So they're galvanizing resources which they don't own. Dawson's galvanizing resources they don't own and putting it into a platform. So what that means is they can focus on the job to be done. And there's a bit of a diagram, you don't have to look at that. So when I think of I think libraries are the ideal platform, actually, because when you think about it, what does Airbnb do? It matches you with some accommodation. It's a filter. It says, where do you want to go, what kind of price range? And that's what libraries do. They filter. You're not going to give everybody anything. You match things. And the key, and this is leading into my next point, those blocks on the side, it's all driven by data. Data is the thing that's driving these platforms. That's why everybody wants your data, so that they can do this. And I think just gave this little publicity, I think, to an Etextbook platform. So, and you can. It's the interesting thing here is following on from what I've said. You know, if you're a startup, you always have to say we're the Airbnb of this. So this textbook platform, we're the Spotify of Etextbooks. So you make your pitch in that term. So they don't. And the interesting thing here is they were set up while they were still students. They started renting print textbooks to students, so they really knew what problem they were trying to solve, and they realise that they've got to get into the institutional market. So, final thoughts. I want to pick up this thing about learning and library resources. And one of those previous briefing papers suggested that we really ought to be taking a more holistic view. You know, why aren't you? If you were free of all that horrible metadata cataloguing stuff and the NBK released you of all that, would you be going off cataloguing video lectures? Or books, somebody else said to me, books are box of broadcasts, very, 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 very valuable, terrible metadata. So why aren't we doing something about that? And here's my prediction then, that there's a trend for library technology. So we've thought of library systems, and the confusing thing is there's learning management systems called LMSs, and there's library management systems called LMSs. And for that reason alone, I think there's going to be some kind of coming together. I would suggest that, you know, we've already seen companies take over reading list systems. I wouldn't be surprised if there was more of that going on, links with VLE systems. So I think there is a move to what we might call learning services platforms. So the message is, forget that you've got a library system. What you've either got is a research services platform or a learning services platform into which library stuff is built in. And we've talked about reading lists, and this is Nottingham Trent. Helen's still here. I've used lots of Nottingham Trent, not because Helen's here, but because they did a great TEF submission, which I've nicked all this stuff from. So that in their TEF submission, they talked about their resource list management service, because it aligns resources with academic courses. Resources to courses is a nice slogan, and that's what reading list software is kind of doing, ultimately. I've talked about disaggregating content, reading lists. You know, I think it was Kevin from Cortex, when I met him at UKSG, was saying, what we've now got the data to do is say this textbook, only this bit, only like 10% of it is ever being used. With that data, they can go to a publisher and say, do you know only 10% of it's being used? Maybe we could put together a new business model here. Maybe we could, and maybe it's around disaggregating the content. And they're already putting bits and pieces from different places together. So there's some opportunity there around, going back to that book idea, if you like, of disaggregating content. And learning analytics, we've heard about that, and I think, this is a quote from JISC, that learning analytics are going to be big, because that's what's helping us make a difference. Nottingham Trent, where is Helen? Here we are again, look at them. I should be working for them, shouldn't I? Student dashboards, you mentioned that. So you get engagement scores, linking, and what she said was you have to link that with all sorts of other material. It's not just what's coming out of library systems. You have to mix it with other kinds of systems. And there's the JISC, I like this, this is a really ambitious quote from JISC, right? Everything you require to track student learning activity so that you can improve retention and attainment. That's the power of analytics. And at the moment, we're in a market where we tend to have management information in your library system and a set of information in your reading list system. That's not going to work. We've got to we're moving to student dashboards now, but ultimately, we're going to move up the chain to business intelligence, what Helen said again, that intelligence stuff at the top level. And I think there's a battle. Whoever wins the data wars. So have you come across a company called Civitas? They're a US company based in Texas. And what they're doing is taking disparate silos, unifying and transforming. This is the intelligence bit. This is where they not only take data from all these different sources, but they put some intelligence onto it so that you're not having to produce reports to your boss about this or that. You've got an intelligence system and it's making predictions. It's saying, here are the students. It's like a thought crime. This student is about to fail. So you rush in and help them and cuddle them and make them go to the library so you can sort them out. So that's going to be, I think, one of the next big things, and I do think there's just going to be the battle for data. People, we know outside Airbnb and Google, and it's really hard not to give Google your data, isn't it? They get it back again as soon as you've switched something off. People want that. So, and think about the value. I just thought about this the other day with reading lists. Think what it's a company Talis has got, right? Talis has, in one system, for the whole of the UK, most of UK reading lists online are in this one single platform. It seems as if it's like different systems. And alongside that is course codes, the JAX codes, which are going to change. Would any publisher there would like to have that information? Here's exactly what's happening to my published content on these reading lists throughout the whole of the UK. Tremendously valuable information that at the moment is not being really leveraged. So, I'm getting towards the end now. Whoever controls the data will have control over the world. So, Dawson's, they'll be having control over the world if they get. So, this is really, really important. This whole data thing is, I agree with Helen, is really going to start to take off. And we all know, okay, GDPR may act as a partial break to that, but there's really going to be something. So, this was this is a quote from a paper. So, as I said, these initiatives, open textbooks and the JISC thing, they're about the producer. So going back to that thing right at the beginning, are we too producer-focused? So they're not really looking at the user experience. They're thinking about, yeah, of course it's important to have this stuff for free, but they're looking at it from a producer point of view, new models of production. So finally, have you come across Clayton Christensen, the guru of disruptive innovation? So one of his examples 15 years ago, saying already at that time hundreds of millions have been spent to apply new technologies, the internet, to e-book displays and blah, 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 blah. Would Clayton Christensen expect these investments to generate significant growth? His answer was probably not. Why not? Because we've been trying to solve the wrong problem, in his view. So textbooks are the wrong thing, in his view. So this is the kind of final disruptive challenge, if you like, that actually, in your student base, you've got a lot of, despite them saying they're hugely valuable, a lot of textbook avoiders. They don't really want a textbook, they want to pass their course. We kind of forget what the job is that they're trying to get done in all this. That these textbooks and things are means to ends. And he was suggesting what we ought to do instead is just have his idea of something, some cram-com. Go on to cram-com, all you need, job done, degree awarded, great job. You know. So maybe we're solving these problems with the wrong thing. That was his view, I thought quite interesting. And finally, so who's going to decide the future in this world of platforms and digital resources? Top hat, this report here said, it's not going to be publishers. Sorry, publishers. It's not going to be you. You're unlikely to be the ones who decide the future of textbooks. That's going to be made by students and faculty. And I think driven by a lot of analytics. They're in the best position to know which types of digital materials produce the best learning outcomes. All right, so, and I think that's important because this final quote from the Director of Libraries at MIT said, you know, we want a digital revolution is what's being said here. We want to take digital libraries to the next level. But if it just means all we do is move from reading print books to PDF versions, that really wasn't much of a revolution, was it? And we've seen, you know, that actually the print book's a pretty good piece of technology. And when you just put it into a PDF, maybe you're answering the wrong problem, that we need more innovative forms of content. And it was interesting, I think it was at UKSG, spoke to JSTOR, who have a lot of open ebooks, and I said, does the fact that they're being open access, is that something that maybe would mean that you take a more innovative approach to the content? And the answer was, no, students want PDFs. And we've heard that students want print. But is that like Henry Ford saying, if I listen to people, they just want a faster horse instead of a car? Is it just because the alternatives are not very good yet that the PDF version of the book isn't that great? So I think the revolution's going to come when we start to rethink the content and rethink the way we deliver the content and think about the user experience, whether you agree with consumerisation of education or not. So that's me. Thank you very much. And you probably want to go to coffee, I think, rather than ask any questions. But